as you're hearing the other side give their view, what are you feeling in your body? Are you starting to feel a sort of rise in tension, a need to defend yourself? Are you trying to plan what you're going to say rather than listening to what they're actually saying? And those are things that we might not take the space to notice when they happen in our everyday lives.
Hey everyone, it's Disagreeing Well, the podcast about polarization, why it matters, what drives it, and what we should be doing about it. I'm your host, John Malloy, and this week we're exploring one of the central themes of this podcast series, the role of religious faith in combating polarization. Now, I'm the first to admit that faith itself can be a source of polarization, but that said, the call of many faith traditions to love unconditionally, see God in the other, including your enemies, and build a society where absolutely everyone flourishes is a call to build bridges and heal divisions. Now, one faith tradition that's taken this call seriously is the Church of England, which as part of its peacemaking and reconciling activities has developed the Difference Course, an interactive program for churches, community groups, educational institutions, and even prisons that help participants develop skills to cross divides, navigate disagreements, and create a stronger sense of belonging. Now, the Difference Course is not only offered in the United Kingdom, and there's an international network of providers. I was delighted to be introduced to the program several years ago, successfully adopting parts of it into the university courses that I teach, and I have to confess that they're often the most popular part of the course. And yes, for those of you who are aware of my faith background and where I teach, this does mean that I'm a Roman Catholic teaching at a Lutheran institution using a Church of England course. Now, to explore difference in the international work being done by the Church of England to combat polarization, I'm so pleased to be joined by two guests today. Kiera Phyo is the director of the Church of England's Reconciling Leaders Network and leads the Difference team. Joe Alstott is the Reconciliation Program Coordinator who focuses on developing difference and peace-building programs outside of Britain. They both join me from London, England. Hello, Kiera and Joe. Welcome to Disagreeing Well.
Hi, John.
Hi, John. Great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have both of you here. There's so much to talk about in terms of the Difference Course and the work that's being done by the Church of England. But I thought I'd start at the beginning and learn a little bit about both of you, how you got involved in the faith world, and in particular efforts to build bridges and depolarization, that sort of thing. So why don't we start with you, Joe? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to your current role.
Thank you, John. Such a privilege to be with you. The roots of it start pretty early on for me. My mother was a community organizer, and I think I felt really strongly through her that connection of how she lived out her faith in a pursuit of justice at a really grassroots level. I think then took that on to study of theology in the New Testament, which has been really grounding for me in this work. And I think you'll hear us talk a lot about how that gospel example is really meaningful for us as a team. I feel very lucky to have spent a lot of my professional life working in areas around the Anglican Communion and resonate with you, John. Actually, I'm Roman Catholic myself by background, but feel very privileged to have got to know intimately the ways in which justice and peace building is flourishing in the Church of England and the Anglican Communion more widely.
And Kiera, how did you come to this work?
So I guess similarly in some ways, like all of our life shapes us a bit, doesn't it? So I grew up in a missionary organization based in the UK, but grew up with lots of differences, lots of different cultures, and participating in kind of community life. So that was quite formative for me. Also through study, I guess I did sociology and philosophy and then did a master's in theology, but with that real angle of, I guess, what our faith looks like in an applied context and through some sociological lenses, thinking around our theological and grounding of our faith. Then went and did a lot of work with an NGO and sort of really empowering young people to think about economic injustice and their faith and their everyday lifestyle and how they could kind of join up some of those dots, which felt like a really natural step into this work of reconciliation. That was really grounded in the restoration of God and that God is restoring us to himself. And so that then led on to this work that more specifically looked at reconciliation.
And I have to ask, personally, are you both bridge builders? Are you always trying to bring the peace to situations that you encounter?
I would think as growing up, I would like to think of myself as the peacemaker. I don't know if my siblings would say that. And then there's also like all these like personality type, tests you can do, isn't there? And so like peacemaking comes up for me a bit there, which I think I in some ways try to. I don't know how much I own that because of all the connotations of a peacemaker, but don't find it easy probably to disagree.
What about you, Joe? You were nodding your head when I asked that.
Yeah, I think so, John. One of the words that we use in our team that I feel kind of resonates with me over what Kiera said about sometimes difficulty with the language of peace builder, but story seeker. I think that's always felt quite natural to me, that trying to pull down some layers of what's meaningful for people, their stories, what they're bringing with them, meeting them where they are. And I think that's what has felt like a real calling in this work, and what keeps making it joyful is the amazing stories that we get to encounter every day of people doing meaningful peace building work in their communities. And so I think that is the core and also the joy of it.
So, I mean, we're all interested in the role that faith can play in terms of polarization, but I think there is a fair criticism to say that faith sometimes causes polarization, that faith can be a source of it. It can be a source of division. There's a whole self righteous side of faith. How do you respond to those concerns that really the last people that should be lecturing anyone about healing divisions or building bridges are people of faith? Joe, you want to start with that question?
Yeah, thank you, John. I think it's a really important one. And I think that awareness about how the views that we hold can cause polarization is important no matter what view we're talking about. I think one of the things that's been quite meaningful for me is separating the view you hold with how you hold that view. And there's a Desmond Tutu quote about how you can use a knife to cut bread or you can use it to stab someone in the back. And I think any view held with conviction could be a source of polarization. And so it therefore is our responsibility to really pay attention to how we hold a view generously and in a way that leans toward embrace. And that's something that we talk a lot about at Difference, and how that posture in how we hold our faith tradition, how we invite others to encounter us in our fullness and therefore allow them to do the same is really important. And I think that perhaps moves us away from that polarizing quality that some people might say that it has.
But let me push back just a little bit, because there are voices, there are faith voices that say, look, we live in an unjust society, we have unjust structures, we have things going on in the world. We could come up with a huge list in about 10 seconds, which are horrific, that need to be called out. And this shouldn't be about building bridges. This should be about fighting for justice. And you know what, if people get upset, so be it. We need to create progress, and not to sort of have niceties between each other. So I'm sure that's an argument that you encounter in your travels, and I don't know how you respond to that. Joe, if you want to pick it up, but I'm also anxious to hear what Kiera has to say.
Oh, thank you, John. And yeah, also very keen to hear Kira's thoughts. I suppose how I'd come to that question, John, is first of all just to agree. I think that's a critique that is really right, and to resist any version of reconciliation that becomes peace without truth. I think Bonhoeffer calls it cheap grace, grace that asks nothing, costs nothing, changes nothing, isn't true grace, isn't true reconciliation. And I think we have to work really hard in this sphere that we're in to be attentive to power. And I'd completely agree that reconciled relationships aren't possible without truth telling and without justice. And when the oppressed are asked to forgive or to move on while the structures that harm them are still in place completely unchanged, then that isn't reconciliation. But I think one of the things that we also try and bear in mind is that anticipating reconciliation at some future time perhaps also misunderstands what it is, and that reconciliation isn't just the end of justice, it can also be the means by which justice becomes possible. And so systems don't change on their own, people change systems, and people rarely change without that work of encountering the other. And it's something that we are really passionate about at Difference, that work on your character, and that small courageous acts of crossing divides aren't just distractions from justice, but they can be a sort of soil in which justice grows.
Yeah, Kiera, we want to jump in.
I guess there have been a couple of voices that have been quite influential for me, the formation of peace building or reconciliation. We work closely with someone called Pastor Ray Minican, who is an Indigenous senior elder in Australia. And when I first met with him, he shared that it is the discourse of the wounded who are always looking for reconciliation. And I was really challenged by that in terms of who is doing the work of reconciliation, and when it's that labor or that work is on the cost of those who have maybe experienced the injustice or experienced the oppression or have been wounded. So that was a real challenge to me, to join in the work of reconciliation and being someone that isn't on that sharp tip of that pain. And it also went on to talk about, it is a wounded God who we worship, rejected, not received, abandoned, betrayed, and that we worship a God who is always reconciling us to Him and the world. So the second person is someone called René Padilla, who is an Ecuadorian evangelical theologian and missiologist who talks about integral mission, and this idea that we have kind of separated things that were never intended to be separated, whether that was evangelism and social action, but this part of our faith that is quite holistic. So to not pull out dichotomies, but what is this kind of whole restorative story that we're part of? And so when we're thinking about peacemaking or reconciliation, that also goes hand in hand with things like justice, and talks about, the fruit of righteousness is peace. The fruit of justice is some of that peace and reconciliation that can be found.
But I think it's important to have the discussion of what reconciliation means or bridge building. There's this natural reaction, I think, that it's about compromise, it's about me admitting I'm wrong, or perhaps more likely, me hoping that the other side admits they're wrong, because at the end of the day, what I'm putting forward is the just cause. So how do you navigate that? What does reconciliation mean in the context of the work that you do, the difference course, that sort of thing? Where does compromise fit into it? And the flip side is we all sort of laugh and say, "Oh yeah, this is all about someone else adopting my views." But if it's simply both of us sort of hearing each other and that's it, then we're not really making much progress. So how do you, I know this is really complicated, but how do you sort of deal with that puzzle? So Kiera, what's your wisdom on that?
I guess it's worth saying that we're also quite careful about the language of reconciliation, because it can mean very different things in different contexts, or it can have political associations. So in some ways we're careful around the language of that. But I think your point, in part, we talk about at difference, we talk about the habit of being present, and that is not in pursuit of kind of compromise where we all end up in the middle, thinking and feeling the same, and actually all somewhat quite unsatisfied, and potentially not feeling very true or real or genuine to our breadth or diversity or differences of thought experience. And so I think that work of peace building or bridge building or reconciliation can do a couple of things. But one of the things which personally I think I can find quite hard is sometimes to even find my own perspective in that. So there's something about understanding someone else's as well as understanding your own. And John, we've talked a bit about this with some of the work that you do in how we're helping one another or even ourselves kind of find our own thoughts and why we think what we do, and being present in that sense with ourselves and owning some of those views or culture or tradition or faith or belief actually helps us then engage with someone that has different views or perspectives or background in a more reimagined or revealing way that helps us draw towards one another, become those story seekers that Joe spoke about, that helps us understand our own story in a deeper way as well as somebody else.
Joe, do you want to pick up on that point?
I think that point that Kiera made about leaning into how we hold our own views as well as how we encounter the views of others feels central for me. I think sometimes think about encountering other people whose views are different than our own as a way of airing, testing those views that we have, humanizing the other, maybe I think prevents some of the views we have from curdling into contempt even, or being completely removed from what others may actually believe. And I think it forces them to be tested, developed, maybe complexified, and we might find that changes our view, but we also might find that actually strengthens a core value that we hold, and that encounter maybe changes how we hold that view. We can view the other side with generosity, but we don't necessarily have to relinquish those core values. They might even be strengthened by that encounter.
But it's a way to live together, finding some common ground, and to even respect the disagreement. Or, I mean, I think the term humanize is so important, because we see it every day. The A big part of the us and them is making sure that we see the them as just sort of some evil force out there that we need to fight against, as opposed to real human beings who, in so many ways, share a lot of our same things. They're trying to raise families or make ends meet to get through the day-to-day life. So it changes you to see that, and that's why I've appreciated the difference course. And I think talking about the difference course will also shed a bit more light on this question of what exactly bridge building, reconciliation. Of course, in the Canadian context, reconciliation is so often associated with the work that's done with our Indigenous community. So it has a very specific Canadian understanding, but you're obviously very much in line with that, but you're looking at it in a broader way through difference. So tell me, before we get into the nitty gritty of the difference course, tell me about where the difference course came from, and the fact that it has this international reach throughout sort of the Anglican Communion. So who's the historian of difference? Is Kiera, are you the historian of difference?
Yeah, that's my formal title. So, well, this really was recognizing that we live in this society that is fractured, is polarized, is hurting, is fragile. And I think we can also feel like that sometimes just in our own life. We can feel a bit fractured and fragile or internally conflicted. And so, wanting to create something, this came out of Lambeth Palace. It connects in with some of the work that the Anglican Communion are doing around peace and reconciliation, and the kind of fourth mark of mission to be pursuing those. And so recognizing the kind of, the fractured nature of society, as well as sometimes our fragile selves, it came to be a resource that really helps us in our formation. And as Christians, looking at how do we follow Jesus in a fractured and fragile world, and how does that mean I exist? What's my sense of being? What's my posture in moments of disagreement or division or fracture? So we created it over quite a few years, about 2 or 3 years of lots of piloting and testing. We did a big international review and made quite a lot of changes after that, which really strengthened it, with adding in and including greater sort of global insight and learning and wisdom. And then that was for churches. And then, to our surprise, a prison chaplaincy ran it in their context and came back to us and said that this was one of the most transformative resources after like 10 years of prison ministry. So then we worked with them and some other prison chaplains to contextualize it for prisons. And then in the last kind of 18 months, 2 years, we've been developing it for young people, really believing that for any process of peace, flourishing society, the role and integrated role and voice of young people is really essential. So a lot of us come from a bit of youth background and have wanted to create something for young people for a long time. So we've been really excited to develop something for like teenagers, but also for young children, for kind of 6, 7, 8-year-olds through some of our elementary and in the UK what we call primary school resources, and that takes us up to this year. Really, we just launched that for elementary schools, and it's been amazing. So that's some of the history.
And Joe, one of the areas you work on is moving it beyond the UK. So did it begin? Was the idea that it would just be a UK focused program, or did you always have the sense of it being international? And then how does the international work? Which countries are you working in? Is it just English language, or does it go beyond that?
Perfect question. I love talking about this. So I think the heart of difference was always really international. I think Kiera just mentioned about that international group, which really helped form and strengthen the resource. So that has always been in mind in terms of the curriculum and the core message of it, I think there was a lot of wonderful joy and surprise about how quickly the international uptake joined us after the launch, and the fact that the pandemic forced us to go so quickly online in a way facilitated more of that reach. We currently operate across 5 continents, which is really exciting everywhere but Antarctica currently, and 7 languages.
Currently, you're working on it.
Working on the penguins. Yeah. So and 7 languages, which is something that's really life-giving for us. I think some of the highlights for me recently, we've run a difference course with several leaders of young people across the Middle East. We've also the Anglican Communion Youth Network, which has people from, again, 4 or 5 continents, 6 or 7 countries. We ran a wonderful international difference course with them online. And I think each of these encounters, each course run really strengthens our material. I think our posture as a team is really that we learn and grow, and the material is there to be enriched and strengthened and contextualized by hosts and participants. And so each time it's run, I think the charism and our work as a team grows. And Kiera, I know as well, was in Canada quite recently for some events about difference there.
Yeah, Kiera, do you want to talk about its presence in Canada? Certainly, I've been in contact with some Anglican churches in our part of the world, or our part of Canada, that runs difference. But you've been expanding, I know, particularly in some of the school areas.
Yeah, it was wonderful to be over. One, because your country is beautiful.
It
So
is.
that was very special. My first time visiting, and we visited with 3 different Christian school networks, and that was an amazing experience, and really meeting with teachers, educators in Canada to talk through what life is like for you, what students are going through at the moment in Canada, some of the things that we're talking about here now, and how we can in Canada could run it, and also how we could contextualize it a bit more. And you spoke to that context of an Indigenous voice. So the school's version is based in storybooks in children's literature, and so thinking about who are the authors and the Indigenous writers that we could use their texts and storybooks to integrate it to make it a bit more relevant for Canada. So that's been a really meaningful piece of work as well.
There's so much going on, but we've got to get to the substance. What is the difference course, and what do you do at a difference course meeting, and how has it been integrated into schools and prisons and that sort of thing? So at the core of the difference course, and I'm talking to the 2 experts, but I think it's always advertised this way, is 3 formational habits. And can you sort of explain what they are, and how do they relate to basic Christian teaching, to the Church of England's faith traditions? So who wants to give us the beginning of 101, Difference 101? I'm not sure. Kiera, are you? You're in some of the promotional videos. So
yeah, great. So what is difference? So it's a kind of multi-session interactive course that's all available to download for free. And is looking at that formational work. So it follows the pattern of 3 habits, and we recognize the connection between kind of what we believe, what we do, our practice of reflection and learning. So there are skills within difference, but it does lean more into that posture or formational work. Something like 45% of our habits are controlled in our daily actions, and something like 95% are controlled by our subconscious mind. So we've taken the root of actually habits are really important, those things that we practice every day that help us become the kind of people that we think the scripture invites us to be. So shaping our speaking, our talking, our praying. So those are the habits of being curious, being present, and reimagining. And so being curious is rooted in, the Genesis story. We are all made in God's image. So everybody has innate worth, high value, high dignity. So we seek out the story of the other. We take that posture of wonder and listening, which affirms their innate value. And as we listen to the stories of others, one, we have a better understanding of our own. Two, we understand someone else's better. And then thirdly, hopefully we see how we are part of a bigger story, a bigger narrative. And then being present. Joe, do you want to talk about being present? And you could relate that, Joe, into the work that we're doing at the moment and the importance of that in situations of conflict.
Yeah, thank you, Kiera. Yeah, so as Kiera said, the habits are quite wide-ranging and transformative, and I think we feel that with Be Present in particular. The biblical rooting of it for us is really incarnational. We believe as Christians that God became human and chose to be part of a hurting world, and that his response to injustice was to step in and to be present in a radically different way. What we define that as looking like in our encounters often is showing up and sticking around, making time for the other person, dedicating attention to them, encountering them as they are, where that's safe for us to do so, moving away from avoidance and denial and hostility and towards empathy and hospitality and embrace. But critical to that is a practice of lament as well, I think, in personal relationships and also in the world. We see a huge amount of pain and suffering, and being present invites us to look at that, as hard as that may be, to own it, to witness to it. And I think it would feel hard to talk about this topic without referencing some of the global conflict that we see at the moment. Particularly in my work, we have so many wonderful partners in areas in the Middle East, South Sudan, who this isn't a optional thing for them. This is something they live every day. And I think what we hope is that this practice of being present honors that and is about practicing that prophetic witness of truth telling within ourselves. It takes a lot of courage as a practice, is something that we try to own, and is vulnerable within ourselves and to other people, but hopefully invites some of that vulnerability back as well.
And then the third habit, Kiera, we'll go
Is
back to you.
is reimagining. So this is, rooted in the belief that God is renewing all things. Like in, 2 Corinthians, we are a new creation. We are born again, invited into the reconciling work as Christ's ambassadors in this world. And there's a theologian called Walter Brueggemann who talks about the prophetic imagination, which I find really inspiring, and that hope that we can see beyond our prevailing circumstances and to recognize that we are confined in many ways by our imaginations. But to reimagine involves the other. It involves the stretching or involvement of the Holy Spirit. It involves the diversity and breadth of one another to reimagine, to see differently, and to kind of enact that hope for the places that we're longing to see change. Those are 3 habits.
I mean, sometimes, having done some of this work with my students and with others, I think it's easy sometimes to just dismiss all of these as yeah, I mean, yeah, we should all be nice to each other kind of thing. But what my experience has shown is that when a lot of people think about being present or being curious or even reimagine, there are these sort of subconscious guardrails that's fine when you're talking about people who are sort of from your world, who you might have a bit of friction with, who they might have some beliefs you find a little bit troubling. But this is no guardrails, right? This is about trying to figure out how we're all going to live together with people whose views you might find, forget difficult, you might find abhorrent, people that you really don't want to have anything to do with. And I think it's important to stress, I don't know if you agree, that really is the challenge of difference, is to not just deal with those who are just like you but just slightly different. This is about a world that's full of people that a lot of us just don't understand and sometimes can't even stand. So I don't know. You're both nodding your head. Kiera, is that sort of, do you see that as the biggest challenge here?
Yeah, I think difference in particular is looking at those interactions that we have in our daily life. So that's the friendships I have, the relationships I have, or even realizing the relationships that I don't have. And some of those are also actually hardest with those that we're closest to or have known really well. So I've got both friends and family that have landed in really different opinions to mine, whether that's socially or politically. And I think sometimes it can also be really hard when those people are close to you, because I'm like, no, but they should be the same. So how have they got there? Well, no, I thought we thought all the same things, and so feeling that gap can actually feel really acute. So, in the UK at the moment, there's been a kind of increase in far right rhetoric, or media narratives that increasing some of the language around hate, and increasing sort of marches on the streets. And one of those last year would have been a march that I would have really disagreed with. And when my friend that I've known for a very long time posts themselves on social media at that march, like, that stopped me from walking, because I have to take a moment, and I'm like, okay, what would be really easy for me to do is to dismiss everybody in that march. What would be really easy for me to do is to think none of those people are really Christians, or none of those people really follow Jesus, or a lot of association of what I'd consider really negative words about them. And so then when I see my friend there, I have to work out, like, okay, we talked about humanizing, and what it means I can't do or need to refuse to do is totally write them off or totally disregard them, and do some of that work to go, help me understand, as well as standing up still for what I might think of as a justice issue. So it's not about losing that advocacy for what you hold as right or wrong or justice, or we talked about confidence or belief, whilst also not making society more polarized. It's so much easier to polarize and to create gap. And I think it's a much harder situation to go, okay, I deeply disagree, and we'll have that discussion, but what I don't want to do is polarize them and other them to, like, the other side of the extreme that gives me some sort of right to dismiss their humanity or their value. So difference might speak into some of those bigger narratives, but I think it speaks a lot into our lived day-to-day experience in relationships.
And Joe, you mentioned the presence of difference in countries that are war torn, or countries that are undergoing huge conflicts. So, do you want to just speak a little bit about that, which is moving beyond some of the ideological issues we're seeing here?
One of the projects that we've been working on as a team recently is we're in the development stages of a project that is the conflict sensitive version of difference. Our team has been playing really just a convening role in that, with sort of gathering the voice of people who are living or have lived through conflict, live violent conflict, and their wisdom, sort of prophetic witness to what the experience of conflict has been like for them, and what therefore words like reconciliation and peace has meant to them from a faith perspective. I think it's been incredibly moving to witness that, and one of the phrases from one of our partners that has really stayed with me was that we cannot wait for a time of peace to start doing this work. This work needs to be done now. And it's, as Kiera was mentioning, this character work of how we don't lose the humanity of the other side, particularly when we're being invited to do that. And I think that's potentially one of the points of crossover that we've seen between some of the polarizing rhetoric that Kiera was talking about in the UK, but it's also very present in these areas of live conflict where you're almost encouraged and invited to dehumanize that other side, to view them as a particular view, a particular party, without complicating that in any way. And so I think we feel really enriched by the practices of these people who bear such moving, wonderful witness to what an impact striving for peace has meant for them and their communities.
How do we do it? How does difference start to build some of these habits? I mean, I'm obviously familiar with the course, and it's offered over several sessions, and you have different exercises and activities. So do you want to talk about some of the key ones, how they move into this? I don't know who's up on the exercises. As I said, Kira's in the promotional video, so the
Know the material. Yeah. So, well, it has five sessions, unless you're a young person, and then you have six. And that, the themes are things like crossing divides, practicing forgiveness, navigating disagreement, belonging together, risking hope. And John, I know that you're a good practitioner of some of the activities, such as thinking through different kind of statements. So whether that's, think cats are better than dogs, or you think pineapple belongs on pizza, which surprisingly gets quite a high disagreement level, pizza and pineapple.
You know, as an aside, it was Canada that started putting pineapple on pizza. That's according to Wikipedia, so it
Okay,
has
not
to be
Hawaii,
correct.
because we call it a
No, it
Hawaiian
wasn't. It
pizza.
was Hawaiian pizza comes from Canada. So,
Good to know.
and our prime minister recently ordered Hawaiian pizza, and it triggered a debate in the news. But
Do you see
anyway,
what I
that's
mean? Do you see what I mean? It gets a lot of traction. This
yeah.
question brings up through to actually, some bigger questions, whether those are around equality or globalization or lying is never justified, and social media benefits society. But some of that practice is to try and think about, again, what we talked about, sometimes finding our own views on things, giving ourselves the time and the kind of breath space sometimes to go, like, what is it that I think, and why is it that I think that, and what's formed me to find that opinion, whether that's scripture or experience, and then thinking about the person that thinks kind of that opposite number, um as me. Like, so as you say, John, like, what would a thoughtful person that thought exactly the opposite say? What's formed them? So that's an example of an activity. There is a film story in each session that is the sort of testimony or story of a Christian who's talking about a conflict or a division or a disagreement they've had. It looks at the life of Christ. So we've looked at encounters that Jesus has had, and we learn from those that the habits that are deeply inspired and rooted in what we see of Jesus's daily life. And then it has some of these activities that get to that applied nature. So it's not just cognitive reflection. It's not just like nice language that we're all talking about, but what does that mean to me? I gave that example of my friend. What does it mean to how I engage? And then this time of prayer, time of applied thought, time of decompression, kind of what depending on the group, what works for them, to work out what's my takeaway. How does this make any difference to me? What's the point of this session? What's the point of this learning? What does it mean to me on a Monday morning? And so each kind of session is structured in that way.
Just to unpack it a bit as to how I've introduced it in my class, and I've done different activities and not just classes, but when I've been asked to speak, is the whole, let's create some division over our cats better than dogs. Sometimes I think that's the most controversial one that you ask, because people get very upset. But it's about starting to get people to talk and to talk about their differences, and that can then lead into very, very serious issues that are dividing us. Get people to, again, as you say, think through their feelings on it, but then really pull the rug from under them, ask them to think about how people on the opposite side would argue it. And I always throw in the word thoughtful, because there is, there are voices out there that are just antagonistic, that are just offensive. They're not making a point. But I found that when you ask people who have strong views on an issue to enunciate how those on the opposite side would express their opinion, it's a really, really interesting exercise. I've got to tell you, I've done it with students. I've done it with older adults in sort of a continuing education setting and that sort of thing. Sometimes people actually can't enunciate how a thoughtful person on the other side would come forward. And I'm moving from cats and dogs. We're talking about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was a debate in Canada a number of years ago. I know you've had a very, very similar debate in the UK about Canadian history, and whether it's more of a shameful stories or things we should be proud of, and just getting people to figure out what they think about it. That seems okay. That seems easy. But then how would an opposite voice think about it? And I think people are changed when they're forced to do it. But what I find, I'm not, I'll turn to you for your experience, is sometimes it's challenging. I mean, people find these questions more challenging than perhaps they first thought. I don't know, Joe. You've seen it in action.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, Jordan. I think that activity we find works, as you say, in so many different contexts and settings. I think one of the things that I find to be particularly transformative about it is we try and lean into the almost embodied side of difference and conflict. You know, we say to people, as you're hearing the other side give their view, what are you feeling in your body? Are you starting to feel a sort of rise in tension, a need to defend yourself? Are you trying to plan what you're going to say rather than listening to what they're actually saying? And those are things that we might not take the space to notice when they happen in our everyday lives. But I think this is a formative practice that helps you going forward to notice exactly what is going on in your mind and your body in these kinds of encounters.
And I think one of the strengths of difference, certainly from my perspective, has been your openness to adapting it to the setting, to who you're with. And I know that it is a dynamic. I mean, you've talked about its evolution, but it is a dynamic program. And unfortunately, it's now needed more than ever. We've seen here in Canada, obviously from a distance, some of the divisions in the UK, and you've probably seen some of the divisions that are growing here in Canada, which are quite disturbing. And obviously, the United States is top of mind, as are other jurisdictions. How are you thinking through this current state of polarization, and how to, I guess, get difference in front of more people, but also are there adjustments or plans that you have for adapting it to this current crisis, I guess? Who's Joe? Are you in the, well? You're the forefront of the international. So what sort of thinking are you? I mean, you've mentioned some of it about difference in conflict. Are you thinking about other ways forward?
I suppose the core of it is that point that you made so wonderfully. Is just that we are by nature a very adaptable resource. Our kind of MO as a team is that um, we have this resource that we want to be grown and strengthened and enriched by hosts and participants that run it in their different areas and then their different conversations. And I know, John, that you have used the course so wonderfully in ways that work for your teaching setting. And I think we are really keen to encourage that and for people to use it as they know is safe and helpful to lean into to areas that work for them. And that's absolutely the approach that we've taken with conflict sensitive, where the research that we've done led us to specific themes, and we have worked with practitioners in areas of conflict to help us to create material on those themes. I think Kiera mentioned as well that we've been developing material for young people for schools, that we say in UK primary and secondary schools. And I think part of the motivation for that was the amount of polarization that we see in young people. And I think in the UK, there was a Global Nation, Global Solidarity report that came out recently that reported that Gen Z, far more than their sort of millennial counterparts, feel less connected globally, and that in a time where technically we're more connected than ever, we're losing those bonds of empathy and connection that help us to connect to other people around the world. And I think particularly in my work, that felt like a real call to action of where we can set up those networks that encourage that practice of empathy and connection.
So how does someone access the difference course, run the difference course? I probably proof that you don't have to be a here in Canada an Anglican church to run it. It's open to everyone. So what's the criteria if you want to offer a course? What are the steps? So
It's a great point because difference was co-created across different denominations. So although we've come from the kind of Anglican church, it's always been incredibly ecumenical. We had Baptists and Pentecostals and Jesuit Catholics and a monastic community and like a really broad group of churches that helped us develop it. And very easily you can go onto the difference website and you can just set up a course yourself. And if you're a church, then you can get all the training online, kind of in your own time. It's videos and articles. And if you want to run it with young people, there's a 2-hour Zoom training that we do. So it's difference.rln.global, and it's there to be downloaded and used with small groups. It could be anything from kind of 6, 7, 8 people through to some groups have done it with like 200 people. You might want to have a few co-facilitators at that size, but it's aimed to be flexible. If you've got a small group or a larger group, there's an online version, an in-person version, and then all those different contexts.
And certainly I've been able to integrate it into a university course, which although has a faith overtone, is open to all students. It's not, I mean, I don't teach at a Bible college or a faith, I mean, it's a faith-based institution, but we teach students from all sorts of backgrounds. Joe, you want to jump in?
Oh, just to mention the ever important point, John, that all the resources are free as well. And we do that because we really want to make sure that anybody that is interested in this work and wants to learn more about it can access those resources. And the training that Kiera mentioned is also free to attend. And so we really just hope that that lowers a barrier for entry and encourages people to explore this as much as they can.
Well, I'm going to give a personal testimonial and say that it's really enriched my courses, discussions around polarization. I'm always pleasantly surprised at how much the students enjoy the exercises. And maybe I shouldn't say enjoy, they find them challenging. I think they enjoy the challenge, particularly to try to come to terms with how they think, how they approach the world, but also their understanding of the other and how to enhance that. Where are they coming from? What's their perspective, and how can we build bridges? Because there is a concern amongst all of us, but I'm certainly finding it amongst the younger generation about polarization. And this is such an amazing resource. So thank you very, very much for the work that you do and for appearing on Disagreeing Well. And good luck with difference. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Next week, Disagreeing Well will be looking at one of the most polarizing issues facing our society as I speak with Raja Curry and Jeffrey Wilkinson, authors of The Wall Between: What Jews and Palestinians Don't Want to Know About Each Other.
Polarization really is the resistance to the idea that there's another story. And so that's what we tried to set up. The heart of the book is really explaining the two groups to each other. So when words that you hear like anti-Semitism, Zionism, apartheid, the Nakba, Palestinian resistance, we break down how each group hears those words entirely differently and how they're already set up to sort of remove us into a bubble and to resist how someone else might feel about it.
You've been listening to Disagreeing Well, a production of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College, federated with Wilfrid Laurier University, located in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Disagreeing Well is produced and edited by Lauren Kivenhoven with additional production and promotional support from Hardika Ahuja. Our theme music is Stuck in Dreams by Kulikova, courtesy of Pixabay. You can find Disagreeing Well on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and please follow us there. To find links to each episode, show notes, and to learn more about the work of the Center for Public Ethics, you can also follow us on our free Substack. Thanks for listening.